The scream that tore through the Colorado mountain forest in the late afternoon of June 1878 was not one of fear, but of pure frustration, and it belonged to Katherine Zimmerman as she watched a black bear lumber away with her entire basket of carefully gathered wild strawberries. She stood there, hands on her hips, her dark blonde hair escaping its braid in wild tendrils around her flushed face, staring after the thief with an expression that could have curdled milk. The bear, completely unrepentant, disappeared into the thick pine forest without so much as a backward glance, leaving Katherine with nothing but an empty afternoon, and the prospect of explaining to Mrs. Henderson why there would be no strawberry preserves this week. She was 22 years old and had spent the better part of her life learning every plant, root, berry, and mushroom that grew in these Rocky Mountains. Her mother, God rest her soul, had been a forager too, teaching Katherine from the time she could walk which leaves would heal a fever and which berries would kill a man stone dead. After her mother's passing 3 years ago, Katherine had taken over the business of supplying the small mining town of Silver Creek with medicinal herbs, edible plants, and the occasional luxury of wild berries. It was not glamorous work, but it kept her independent, and independence was something Katherine valued more than gold. The problem was that independence did not fill an empty basket, and she still had 2 more hours of daylight to make something of this wasted trip. She adjusted the leather satchel across her shoulder, checked that her gathering knife was still secured at her belt, and started deeper into the forest. There was a grove about a mile north where she had seen elderflowers blooming last week. They would not make preserves, but she could dry them for tea, and old Mr. Patterson always paid well for elderflower remedies for his rheumatism. Katherine had been walking for perhaps 20 minutes when she heard the sound. It was low and pained, a groan that spoke of serious hurt. Her first thought was that some miner had wandered too far from camp and gotten himself injured, which happened more often than anyone cared to admit. Men came to Colorado territory with dreams of silver and left with broken bones, or worse, did not leave at all. She followed the sound through a dense thicket of pine and scrub oak, pushing branches aside with practiced ease, until she came upon a small clearing. What she saw there made her stop dead in her tracks. A man lay propped against a massive boulder, one hand pressed to his side where blood had soaked through his buckskin shirt in an alarming crimson stain. He was conscious but clearly in significant pain, his jaw clenched tight and his breathing shallow. What struck Katherine immediately, even before the severity of his injury fully registered, was the sheer size of him. He was easily over 6 feet tall with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the sun. His arms, visible where his sleeves were rolled up, were corded with muscle, and his chest, despite the blood, showed the kind of strength that came from years of hard living in the mountains. His hair was dark brown, long enough to brush his shoulders and currently matted with sweat. A thick beard covered the lower half of his face, but his eyes, when they opened to look at her, were a startling clear gray like storm clouds over the peaks. "Do not come closer," he managed to say, his voice rough as gravel. "Might still be around. What might still be around?" Katherine asked, already moving toward him despite his warning. She had not survived 22 years in these mountains by being foolish, but she also recognized a man who needed help when she saw one. "Cougar," he said. "Big one. Surprised me about an hour ago. Got a shot off. Think I wounded it, but not before it got me good." Katherine scanned the tree line quickly, her heart picking up speed. A wounded cougar was about the most dangerous thing you could encounter in these mountains, more dangerous even than a bear protecting cubs. But the man was still bleeding, and if she left him here while she ran for help, He might not survive long enough for that help to arrive. She made her decision in seconds. I am going to look at that wound. Keep your rifle ready and watch the trees. He did not argue, which told her more about his condition than words could. A mountain man, which he clearly was based on his clothing and the quality of his gear, would normally rather die than accept help from a stranger, especially a woman. The fact that he was allowing her near him meant he knew exactly how bad his situation was. Katherine knelt beside him and gently moved his hand away from the wound. The cougar had gotten him along his left side, tearing through his shirt and leaving 3 deep claw marks that ran from just below his ribs down toward his hip. It was bad, but she had seen worse. The bleeding was steady but not arterial, which meant he still had time if she could stop it and prevent infection. "This is going to hurt," she said, already reaching into her satchel. She always carried basic supplies when she went foraging: clean cloth, a small bottle of whiskey for sterilizing wounds, needle and thread, and various dried herbs. "What is your name?" "Samuel," he said through gritted teeth. "Samuel Donovan, most just call me Sam." "Well, Sam, I am Katherine Zimmerman. I know plants and healing, so you are lucky I came along instead of some useless miner who would faint at the sight of blood." She worked as she talked, using her gathering knife to cut away his shirt so she could see the full extent of the damage. "This needs stitching, and I need to clean it first. Do you have any whiskey?" "In my pack," he said, jerking his head toward a large leather pack that lay a few feet away. "But you will need to work fast. That cougar knows it drew blood. It might come back." Katherine retrieved his pack and found a full bottle of decent whiskey, better than the rotgut they served in Silver Creek saloons. She poured some on a clean cloth and began cleaning the wounds with swift, efficient movements. Sam hissed in pain but did not cry out, which impressed her. She had seen grown men sob like children over lesser injuries. "You are good at this," he observed, watching her work with those gray eyes that seemed to see more than she was comfortable with. "My mother taught me. Every plant in these mountains, I know what it does." Healing is part of that knowledge. She threaded her needle, poured whiskey over it to sterilize it, and began stitching the deepest of the 3 claw marks. "What were you doing out here alone? Even experienced trappers travel in pairs during cougar season." "I like my own company," Sam said. Then, after a pause, "and I was tracking something." "Tracking what?" "A man. Bad man. He killed a family down in Denver, took their daughter. Trail led up here into the mountains." Katherine's hands paused for just a moment. "You are a lawman." "Not exactly. I track people for bounties sometimes. Other times I do it because it needs doing and no one else will." She resumed her stitching, processing this information. The West was full of men who lived by their own codes, outside the formal law but not exactly outlaws themselves. She had heard of bounty hunters, though she had never met one before. "Did you find him?" "The man you were tracking found his camp yesterday. Girl was already dead." His voice went flat when he said it, empty of emotion, but Katherine heard the anger underneath. "I buried her proper and then tracked him another 10 miles before the cougar interrupted." "I am sorry," Katherine said quietly, and meant it. She finished the first set of stitches and moved to the second claw mark. The light was starting to fade and she worked faster. "We need to get you back to town before dark." "Can you walk?" "I can do what needs doing," Sam said, which was not exactly an answer. She finished the stitching, applied a poultice of yarrow and comfrey that she pulled from her satchel, and bandaged him tightly with strips of clean cloth. "That will hold for now, but you need real rest and more treatment. The yarrow will help stop the bleeding and fight infection, but these are deep wounds. You need to keep them clean and change the dressing twice a day." Sam struggled to his feet, and Katherine moved to help him despite the fact that he outweighed her by at least 100 pounds of solid muscle. He was unsteady, which worried her, but he stayed upright. She gathered his pack and rifle, slinging them over her own shoulders along with her satchel. "Town is 3 miles south," she said. "Can you make it?" "Do I have a choice?" "Not unless you want to spend the night out here with a wounded cougar somewhere nearby." They started walking, Sam leaning on her more heavily than he probably wanted to admit. Katherine kept up a steady stream of conversation, partly to keep him conscious and partly to keep both of them alert for any sounds of the cougar returning. "So you know every plant in these mountains?" Sam asked after they had been walking for about 20 minutes. His voice was strained but steady. "Everyone," Katherine confirmed. "The medicinal ones, the poisonous ones, which berries are safe and which will give you the runs for a week. My mother started teaching me when I was 5. By the time I was 10, I could identify 300 different species by sight, smell, or taste. That is a rare skill. It keeps me fed and housed, not many options for a woman alone in a mining town. No family, not anymore. Mother died 3 years ago. Fever. I tried every remedy I knew, but sometimes knowledge is not enough." She paused, adjusting her grip on his pack. "Father died in a mining accident when I was 15. It has been just me since Mother passed." They walked in silence for a while, the only sounds their footsteps and Sam's labored breathing. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple through the pine trees. Katherine knew these woods well enough to navigate in the dark if necessary, but she preferred not to. "Mountains at night belong to the predators. You said you can taste plants to identify them," Sam said suddenly. "That seems dangerous. It is if you do not know what you are doing. But if you only take a tiny amount, just enough to touch your tongue, you can identify most plants without risk. My mother could tell you the name of any plant blindfolded just by taste. And you, almost. There are a few that still confuse me, some of the mushrooms especially. Those I will not risk." "Smart woman." Katherine felt an unexpected warmth at the compliment. Most men in Silver Creek treated her like an oddity at best, a witch at worst. Old Mrs. Henderson appreciated her skills but also made the sign against evil whenever Katherine mentioned certain plants. It was nice to hear approval without suspicion attached. They reached the outskirts of Silver Creek just as full dark settled over the mountains. The town was small, maybe 200 residents, most of them miners or people who made their living off miners. There was a main street with a general store, a saloon, a church, a boarding house, and a scattering of other businesses. Katherine's cabin was on the far edge of town, close enough to be part of the community, but far enough that she had privacy for her work. She steered Sam toward the boarding house, which was run by a widow named Mrs. Calloway who kept clean rooms and asked few questions. But Sam shook his head. "No boarding house. Too many people asking questions. You got somewhere private?" Katherine hesitated. Taking a strange man to her cabin was not wise, even one as injured as Sam. But she also understood his reasoning. If he was tracking a killer, he probably did not want his presence in town widely known. And she had a good solid door with a bar, and her rifle was always loaded. "I have a cabin. But you sleep on the floor and I keep my rifle close." "Fair enough." Her cabin was small but well maintained. A single room with a fireplace, a bed in one corner, a table with 2 chairs, shelves full of jars containing dried herbs and other supplies, and bundles of plants hanging from the ceiling to dry. It smelled like sage and pine and the faint smokiness of the wood stove. Sam took it all in with those observant gray eyes as Katherine helped him to a chair. "You have quite a collection," he said, nodding toward the shelves. "Years of work." She lit 2 oil lamps, casting warm light through the room and stoked up the fire. "Let me see that wound again." She unwrapped his bandages carefully and was relieved to see that the bleeding had stopped completely. The stitches were holding and the poultice was working. But his skin was hot to the touch, which concerned her. "You are feverish," she said. "Not surprising with wounds like these. I am going to make you something that will help." She moved to her shelves and began selecting jars and bundles with practiced efficiency. Willow bark for the fever and pain. Echinacea to boost his body's ability to fight infection. Golden seal for its antimicrobial properties, and a few other herbs in smaller amounts. She ground them together in her mortar, added boiling water from the kettle that always sat by her fire, and let it steep while she made a fresh poultice for his wounds. "Drink all of that when it cools enough," she instructed, handing him the cup. "It will taste terrible, but it will help." Sam sniffed it cautiously and made a face. "Smells like something died. Drink it anyway." To his credit, he downed the whole thing without complaint, though his expression suggested it was every bit as awful as she had warned. Katherine changed his bandages, applying fresh poultice, and wrapped him up again securely. "You need rest," she said. "Real rest. Those wounds will not heal properly if you are up and moving around too much. I need to finish tracking that man. That man can wait a few days. You will be no good to anyone if you collapse from infection or blood loss." Sam looked like he wanted to argue, but another wave of fever-induced exhaustion clearly hit him. Katherine pulled a bedroll from her storage chest and spread it on the floor near the fire. "Sleep," she commanded. "I will keep watch tonight in case your fever gets worse." She expected him to protest, but he was already stretched out on the bedroll, his body finally giving in to the pain and exhaustion. Katherine settled into her chair with her rifle across her lap and a book of plant illustrations that she had been studying. But she found herself watching Sam more than reading. He was, she had to admit, the most striking man she had ever seen. Even injured and feverish, there was something compelling about him. It was not just his size, though that was impressive enough. It was the way he carried himself, the quiet competence and confidence that came through even when he was barely able to stand. This was a man who knew how to survive in the wilderness, who could track a killer across hundreds of miles of rough terrain, who faced down cougars and probably worse without flinching. And yet he had let her help him. He had trusted her skills enough to follow her back to her cabin. That trust meant something. Katherine dozed lightly throughout the night, waking every hour or so to check on Sam. His fever spiked around midnight, and she cooled him with damp cloths and made him drink more of her medicinal tea. By dawn, the fever had broken, and he was sleeping more naturally. She made breakfast as quietly as possible, frying salt pork and making cornmeal mush. The smell woke Sam, and he sat up slowly, testing his injuries with careful movements. "How do you feel?" Katherine asked. "Like I got mauled by a cougar," he said dryly, "but better than last night." "That tea of yours works." "Of course it works. I know what I am doing." She brought him a plate of food and a cup of strong coffee. "Eat. You need to rebuild your strength." They ate in companionable silence, and Katherine found herself studying him in the morning light. Without the blood and dirt from yesterday, she could see more details. His face was weathered but not old, probably early 30s at most. His hands were scarred but steady. Everything about him spoke of strength and capability. "Why do you keep staring at me?" Sam asked suddenly, catching her in the act. Katherine felt her cheeks heat. "I was not staring. I was observing. There is a difference." "What were you observing?" "That you have had those stitches in your right shoulder for at least a year, and whoever did them was not very skilled. And that scar on your left hand is from a knife fight, probably 5 or 6 years ago based on how it healed. And you have a habit of favoring your right leg slightly, which suggests an old injury to your left knee that never healed quite right. Sam stared at her. How in the hell did you see all that? I am a healer. I notice bodies the way you probably notice tracks in the dirt. It is my job to see what others miss. Something shifted in Sam's expression, a kind of bemused respect. That is unsettling. Most people think so. Katherine stood and began clearing the breakfast dishes. But useful. I can usually tell if someone is lying about their symptoms or if they are sicker than they realize. What else can you tell about me? Katherine paused, considering. You have not been sleeping well for several weeks, probably since you started tracking that killer. You push yourself too hard and do not eat regularly when you are on a trail. You have spent most of your adult life in the mountains, based on how comfortable you are with the altitude and the terrain. And you have something heavy weighing on your conscience, something that drives you to take on work like hunting down murderers. The silence that followed was thick. Sam set down his coffee cup carefully, his gray eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. That is quite an assessment from one night of acquaintance. Am I wrong? No, he admitted. You are not wrong about any of it. Katherine sat back down across from him. I am good at reading people, same as I am good at reading plants. Every person has signs that tell you their story if you know how to look. And what is your story, Katherine Zimmerman? She smiled slightly. Nothing as dramatic as yours. Girl grows up in the mountains, loses her parents, survives on her own. It is a common enough tale out here. Surviving on your own is not common for a woman, especially not in a rough mining town. That takes strength or stubbornness. I have been accused of having plenty of that. Over the next 3 days, Sam recovered with a speed that impressed even Katherine. The stitches held. The infection never took hold beyond the initial fever, and his natural constitution did the rest. She changed his bandages regularly, made him drink her terrible-tasting teas, and forced him to rest more than he wanted. During those 3 days, they talked. Sam told her about his life in the mountains, about learning to track from his father who had been a fur trapper before the beaver trade died out. He told her about the year he spent as a cavalry scout, about deciding that he did not want to fight in other people's wars. He told her about taking up bounty hunting because it let him stay in the mountains while still having a purpose. I like the solitude, he explained on the second evening as they sat by her fire. Most people do not understand that. They think I must be lonely. Are you? Katherine asked, genuinely curious. Sometimes. But I am more lonely in a crowd than I am alone in the woods. Katherine understood that perfectly. She felt the same way most of the time. People exhaust me, she admitted. They want things from me, herbs and remedies and solutions to problems I cannot solve, and they judge me for living differently than they think I should. How do they think you should live? Married to some miner, having babies, keeping house. Not living alone and wandering the forest gathering plants like some kind of hermit. You are not a hermit. You are independent. That is different. Try telling that to Mrs. Henderson, who reminds me every Sunday after church that I am wasting my youth and I will end up alone and bitter. Sam laughed, a deep sound that Katherine found she liked very much. Mrs. Henderson sounds like she has opinions. Mrs. Henderson has opinions about everything. In return, Katherine told Sam about her life, about growing up learning plants from her mother, about the day her father died in the mine collapse and how it changed everything. She told him about the loneliness of watching her mother fade from fever while being powerless to stop it, despite all her knowledge. She told him about the satisfaction of being needed for her skills, but the frustration of never being truly accepted. You are an unusual woman, Sam said on the third evening. His wounds were healing well, and he was sitting up without difficulty now, though Katherine still insisted he take it easy. Most people do not have the courage to live the way you do. It is not courage. I just do not have another choice. Everyone has choices. You choose this life. That takes courage. Katherine felt something warm unfold in her chest at his words. It was rare for anyone to understand why she lived the way she did, rarer still for them to respect it rather than pity or judge her. On the fourth morning, Sam announced that he needed to get back to tracking the killer. Katherine wanted to argue, to tell him he needed more time to heal, but she could see in his eyes that he had already made up his mind. "At least let me check your wounds before you go," she insisted. She unwrapped his bandages carefully and was pleased to see that everything was healing cleanly. The stitches could probably come out in another week if he kept the wounds clean. She made him a supply of poultice and gave him detailed instructions on how to change the dressings. "And if you feel any fever or see red streaks around the wounds, you stop whatever you are doing and find a doctor immediately," she commanded. "Infection from a cougar scratch can kill you if it gets into your blood." "Yes, madam," Sam said with what might have been the hint of a smile beneath his beard. He gathered his gear, checking his rifle and his pack with practiced efficiency. Katherine watched him prepare, feeling an unexpected reluctance to see him go. In just a few days, she had gotten used to having him in her cabin, to their evening conversations by the fire, to the sense of companionship that she had not realized she was missing. "Be careful out there," she said as he moved toward the door. Sam paused, turning to look at her with those storm-gray eyes. "Katherine," he said slowly, "I want you to know that you saved my life. If you had not come along when you did, that cougar would have been the least of my worries. I would have bled out in those woods. You would have found a way to survive. You are tough. Tough only gets you so far. Sometimes you need skill and knowledge, and you have both in abundance." He paused, seeming to struggle with something. "You said you can read people, that you see things others miss." "Yes. Can you read me?" Right now, Katherine studied him, noting the tension in his shoulders, the way he was looking at her like she was a puzzle he was trying to solve. "You do not want to leave," she said quietly, "but you feel obligated to finish what you started. That is not all." He took a step closer, and Katherine was suddenly very aware of how large he was, how he seemed to fill the entire cabin with his presence. "What else do you see?" Her heart was beating faster now. "I see a man who has spent years alone because it was easier than risking connection. I see someone who is surprised to find himself enjoying company for the first time in a long time. And," his voice had dropped lower, rougher, "and I see someone who is attracted to me but does not know what to do about it." The silence stretched between them, charged with something Katherine had never quite experienced before. Sam's eyes searched her face, and she found she could not look away. "You see too much," he said finally. "I only see what is there." "And what is there on your side, Katherine?" "What am I supposed to read in you?" Katherine took a breath, deciding to be honest. "You would see a woman who has spent 3 years convinced she would spend the rest of her life alone, who has made peace with that, but sometimes wishes things were different, and who is going to miss having you around, which is ridiculous because we barely know each other." Sam reached out slowly and tucked a strand of her dark blonde hair behind her ear. His hand was rough from years of hard work, but his touch was gentle. "Not ridiculous," he said. "I am going to miss you too. You know my heart better than I do, I think. You looked at me and saw things I have been trying to hide from myself." "What things?" "That I am tired of being alone, that I want something more than just mountains and solitude and tracking down bad men." He dropped his hand but did not step back. "But I have to finish this job first. That girl deserves justice, and her family deserves to know the man who hurt them has been caught. I understand. Do you? He studied her face. Because I am going to come back, Katherine. When this is done, I am coming back here to Silver Creek to you, if you will have me. Katherine felt her breath catch. You cannot promise that. You do not know what will happen out there. I know I have survived worse than one wounded killer. And I know that for the first time in years, I have a reason to be careful to make sure I come back in one piece. Sam, you do not have to say anything now, just think about it. I will be back in a week, maybe 2 if the trail goes cold and I have to work harder, but I will be back. He leaned down and kissed her forehead, a brief warm pressure that made Katherine's eyes close involuntarily. Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click. Katherine stood in the sudden emptiness of her cabin, touching her forehead where his lips had been, and wondered what exactly had just happened. In 4 days, this mountain man had gone from a bleeding stranger to someone who had seen her more clearly than anyone ever had. Someone who made her feel less alone just by existing. And now he was gone, off to track a killer through the mountains, and all she could do was wait and hope he survived. The next week was the longest of Katherine's life. She went about her normal routine, foraging in the forest, preparing remedies, delivering supplies to various residents of Silver Creek. But her mind was always partly in the mountains, wondering where Sam was, if he had found the man he was tracking, if his wounds were healing properly, or if infection had set in. Mrs. Henderson noticed her distraction. You have been wandering around like a ghost, Katherine. Are you feeling well? I am fine, Mrs. Henderson. Just thinking about some new plants I want to try cultivating. Mrs. Henderson's sharp eyes did not look convinced, but she did not press the issue. It was on the 10th day after Sam left that Katherine heard the news. She was in the general store buying cornmeal when 2 miners came in, talking loudly about a bounty hunter who had captured Simon Grace, the Denver killer, up near the high passes. They said the bounty hunter had tracked Grace for 2 weeks before cornering him in an old cabin. There had been a fight, but Grace was now in custody, being transported back to Denver to hang. That bounty hunter was something else, one of the miners said. Big fellow, looked like he could wrestle a bear and win. Had some nasty scars on his side, fresh too, but he did not let that slow him down. Katherine's heart jumped. It had to be Sam. But where was he now? Was he already on his way back to Silver Creek, or had he gone straight to Denver with his prisoner? She finished her shopping in a daze and walked back to her cabin, trying not to let hope overwhelm good sense. He had said he would come back, but days had passed since Grace's capture, and there had been no sign of him. Maybe he had changed his mind. Maybe in the clarity of being back on the trail, away from the strange intimacy of her cabin, he had realized that what he felt was just gratitude for her healing skills, not genuine affection. Katherine told herself firmly that she would be fine either way. She had been fine before Sam Donovan walked into her life, and she would be fine after. Independence meant not needing anyone, but it did not mean not wanting someone, she realized. And she wanted Sam with an intensity that surprised and frightened her. She was gathering sage near the edge of the forest the next afternoon when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned, expecting to see one of the town's residents, and found herself looking at Sam instead. He was dusty from travel, sporting a fresh bruise on his jaw and what looked like another newly healing cut on his forearm, but he was there, solid and real, and looking at her with an expression that made her chest tight. You came back, Katherine said, hating how breathless she sounded. I said I would. Sam moved closer, and Katherine could see the exhaustion in the lines around his eyes. Did you think I would not? I thought you might reconsider, might decide that a mountain man and a forager were too different to work. Katherine. He said her name like it was something precious. In 2 weeks of tracking Grace through some of the hardest terrain in Colorado, do you know what I thought about? You, your voice, the way you look when you are explaining some plant property, how you made me feel less alone than I have felt in years. You knew my heart better than I did, remember? You saw what I needed before I even knew I needed it. And what did you need? You. I needed you. Katherine set down her gathering basket very carefully because her hands were starting to shake. Sam, I have spent 3 years building a life where I do not need anyone, where I am safe because I only rely on myself. You are asking me to risk that. I know. He closed the distance between them until he was right in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. And I am not asking you to give up your independence. You can still be yourself, still forage and heal and live the way you want. I am just asking if maybe you might want some company while you do it, someone who sees you for who you are and thinks you are extraordinary. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you are brave and skilled and kind. I know you saved my life and asked nothing in return. I know that talking to you is easier than breathing, and that I have never felt as seen by anyone as I felt seen by you in those 4 days. His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheek. Tell me I am wrong. Tell me you do not feel this too. Katherine could not tell him that because it would be a lie. I feel it, she whispered. I feel all of it, but I am terrified. So am I, Sam admitted. I have been alone for so long I am not sure I even know how to be with someone anymore, but I want to try. With you. He kissed her then, and it was nothing like the chaste kiss on her forehead from before. This was deep and claiming and full of all the longing that had been building between them. Katherine wrapped her arms around his neck, pressing close to all that solid muscle and strength, and kissed him back with everything she had. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Sam rested his forehead against hers. I have a plan, he said. A plan. I have money saved from bounties, enough to buy land. I was thinking somewhere between here and the high country, a place where you could have your forests for foraging and I could build us a cabin, somewhere we could both be ourselves. Us, Katherine repeated, testing the word. If you want there to be an us. She thought about it for approximately 3 seconds. I want there to be an us. The smile that broke across Sam's face was like sunrise after a long night. He picked her up and spun her around, making her laugh in a way she had not laughed in years. When he set her down, she was dizzy and happy and terrified and hopeful all at once. We are going to have to take this slowly, she warned him. I am not easy to live with. I am stubborn and particular, and I like things done my way. I live alone in the mountains hunting dangerous criminals for a living. I think I can handle stubborn. They talked for hours that afternoon, sitting in the shade at the edge of the forest, making plans. Sam had already scouted potential land, a beautiful valley about 5 miles from Silver Creek with a stream running through it, and enough forest that Katherine would have abundant plants to forage. He described it in detail, and Katherine could picture it perfectly. How soon can we start building? She asked. As soon as we file the claim, which I can do tomorrow if you are sure about this. I am sure. And she was. It was terrifying and exhilarating and completely unprecedented in her careful, controlled life. But it was also right in a way that Katherine could not explain but knew deep in her bones. They spent the next 3 months building their life together. Sam filed the land claim and began construction on a cabin large enough for both of them, with a separate room that Katherine could use for her healing work. She divided her time between continuing her foraging business in Silver Creek and helping with the construction, learning skills she had never needed before. The people of Silver Creek watched their courtship with interest and no small amount of gossip. Mrs. Henderson alternated between approval that Katherine was finally settling down and disapproval that she had chosen such an unusual man. "He is a bounty hunter, dear," Mrs. Henderson said one Sunday after church. "That is such a dangerous profession. Would it not be better to marry a nice, stable man, perhaps a shopkeeper?" "I do not want a shopkeeper," Katherine replied firmly. "I want Sam." And that was the truth of it. She wanted Sam with his quiet strength and his understanding of her need for independence. She wanted Sam who could track a killer across 200 miles, but also listened attentively when she explained the medicinal properties of different roots. She wanted Sam who made her feel safe and seen and valued for exactly who she was. They were married in September of 1878 in a simple ceremony at the Silver Creek Church. Katherine wore a dress of deep blue that she had sewn herself, and Sam cleaned up remarkably well in new trousers and a white shirt. The whole town turned out, curious to see the hermit healer and the mountain man tie their lives together. After the ceremony, as they walked back to their new cabin in the valley, Sam pulled Katherine close. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I have tracked men across 3 territories, survived cougar attacks and knife fights and winter storms that would kill most men. Is there a point to this list of your adventures?" "The point is that nothing I have ever done scared me as much as saying vows to you today." Katherine looked up at him in surprise. "Why?" "Because everything else I have done, I did alone. If I failed, I only hurt myself. But if I fail at this, I hurt you too. That is terrifying." She stopped walking and pulled him around to face her. "Sam Donovan, you listened to me talk about plants for hours without complaint. You built me a separate room just for my work without me even asking. You have never once suggested that I should change or be different or stop foraging. If that is your idea of failing, I think we will be just fine." "You really believe that?" "I really believe that. You know why? Because you know my heart too. You saw what I needed before I knew I needed it. Someone who would not try to change me. Someone who would stand beside me, not in front of me. You are that person." Sam kissed her there in the middle of the forest trail, with the September sun filtering through the pine trees and the sound of a stream babbling nearby. And Katherine thought that, for someone who had spent years convinced she would always be alone, this felt remarkably like coming home. Their first year of marriage was an adjustment for both of them. Katherine had lived alone for so long that having someone else in her space took getting used to. Sam was almost obsessively neat, which drove her crazy when he reorganized her carefully chaotic herb shelves. She liked quiet mornings, and he liked to be up and moving at dawn. They bickered about small things, learned each other's habits and quirks, and slowly figured out how to share a life. But the good far outweighed the difficult. Sam built her raised beds for cultivating medicinal plants near the cabin, saving her long trips into the forest for common herbs. She taught him about healing, and he proved to be an attentive student, learning which plants did what until he could treat minor injuries himself. He still took bounty hunting jobs occasionally, but only the ones close by, and never for more than a week at a time. Katherine worried every time he left, but she also understood that he needed the work. It was part of who he was, the same way foraging was part of who she was. "I married a mountain man," she told him before one trip, helping him check his gear. "I knew what that meant." "Just promise me you will be careful." "Always," he said, kissing her soundly. "I have too much to come home to now to be reckless." When he was home, Sam proved to be a devoted husband. He chopped wood without being asked, kept their supplies stocked, and spent hours listening to Katherine talk about whatever plant she was currently fascinated by. In return, she cooked his favorite meals, tended his various injuries from the hard life he led, and slowly let herself trust that he was not going anywhere. The turning point came one winter evening during their first year of marriage. A blizzard had struck suddenly, trapping them in the cabin with several feet of snow piling up outside. They were sitting by the fire, Katherine mending a shirt and Sam cleaning his rifle, when he suddenly spoke. "I was married before," he said quietly, Katherine's hand stilled on the shirt. In all their time together, Sam had never mentioned a previous marriage. "What happened?" Her name was Ellen. "We married young, too young probably. I was 20, she was 18. We were happy for about 2 years. He set down the rifle and stared into the fire. "Then she got pregnant. Something went wrong. The baby came too early and Ellen started bleeding. The doctor could not stop it. I lost them both in one night." "Sam." Katherine set aside her mending and moved to sit beside him, taking his hand. "I am so sorry. It was 12 years ago. I should be over it by now. There is no timeline for grief. You lost your wife and child. That does not just go away." Sam looked at her, his gray eyes reflecting the firelight. "I blamed myself for a long time. Thought maybe if I had gotten the doctor faster, or if we had lived closer to town, or if I had somehow been better, things would have been different. It was not your fault. I know that now. Took me years to accept it, but I do know it." He squeezed her hand. "I told myself I would never remarry, that it hurt too much to lose someone, and I was not strong enough to risk that again. What changed? You did. You showed me that strength is not about protecting yourself from pain. Real strength is being willing to risk pain for something worthwhile. You are worthwhile, Katherine. You are worth every risk." Katherine felt tears prick her eyes. "You never talk about your feelings." "I know. I am not good at it, but you deserve to know that I love you, not because you are convenient or because I needed someone. I love you because you are you. Stubborn and independent and brilliant. You challenge me and see me and make me want to be better." "I love you too," Katherine whispered. "I tried not to for a while. I thought if I could just keep you at a distance, protect myself, it would hurt less if you left. But you were right that day in town. I did feel it. I have loved you since you looked at me with those serious eyes and trusted me to save your life." They held each other that night while the blizzard raged outside, and Katherine felt something shift between them. They had been married, yes, but this felt like a new level of commitment, of true partnership. He had trusted her with his deepest pain, and she had trusted him with her heart fully and completely. Spring came early to the Colorado mountains that year, and with it came news that changed everything. Katherine had been feeling unwell for several weeks, tired and nauseated at odd times. At first she thought it was just a stomach complaint, but when her monthly courses failed to arrive, realization hit her like a thunderbolt. She was pregnant. The news filled her with a complicated mix of joy and terror. She wanted children, had always assumed she would have them someday, but she also knew all the things that could go wrong. She had helped deliver babies before, had seen women die in childbirth, had treated newborns who struggled to survive their first days. And she knew about Ellen, about Sam losing both his wife and baby. How would he react to this news? She waited until evening, until they had finished dinner and were sitting outside watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of orange and pink. Then she took a deep breath and spoke. "Sam, I need to tell you something." He looked at her, immediately alert. "What is wrong? Are you sick?" "Not sick. Pregnant." The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Sam stared at her, his expression unreadable, and Katherine felt her heart sink. Maybe this was too much for him. Maybe the memories of Ellen were too strong. Then he was on his feet, pulling her up and into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "Pregnant," he repeated, his voice rough with emotion. "We are going to have a baby." "You are happy about this?" Katherine asked, pulling back to see his face. "Happy." "Katherine, I am terrified and thrilled and about a dozen other emotions I cannot even name. But yes, I am happy. So damned happy. I am scared, she admitted. I know all the things that can go wrong. So am I, but we are not alone this time. You have all your knowledge and skills. And I am going to be here every step of the way. We will get through this together. The pregnancy was not easy. Katherine suffered from terrible morning sickness for the first 3 months, and Sam hovered like an anxious mother hen, driving her crazy with his constant worry. But she was also grateful for his presence, for the way he took over the heavy work without complaint, for how he rubbed her swollen feet every evening without being asked. As her belly grew, so did their preparations. Sam built a cradle from smooth pine, sanding it until it was soft as silk. Katherine sewed baby clothes from soft cotton, her hands creating tiny garments while her mind imagined the child who would wear them. They talked about names, about how they would raise their child, about all the dreams they had for their growing family. I want to teach our children about the forest, Katherine said one evening, her hands resting on her swollen belly. About plants and healing and respecting the land. And I will teach them to track and hunt and survive in the wilderness, Sam added. Between the two of us, they will be unstoppable. I hope we have more than one. I like the idea of a house full of children, Katherine laughed. Ask me again after I have delivered this one. But the truth was, she liked the idea too. After years of being alone, the thought of a large, boisterous family felt like a gift. Labor started on a cold February morning in 1880. Katherine's water broke just after dawn, and by noon the contractions were coming hard and fast. Sam had fetched Mrs. Calloway from town to help. Along with the closest thing Silver Creek had to a doctor, old Doc Morrison, who was better with animals than people, but had delivered his share of babies. The labor lasted 18 hours, and they were the longest 18 hours of Sam's life. He stayed by Katherine's side the whole time, letting her grip his hand hard enough to leave bruises, wiping her face with cool cloths, whispering encouragement even when his own fear threatened to overwhelm him. I cannot do this, Katherine gasped during a particularly brutal contraction. It is too much. You can, Sam said firmly, his voice steady even though his insides were churning with terror. You are the strongest person I know. You can do anything. That is not actually helpful right now, she snapped, and he almost smiled because if she still had the energy to be irritable with him, she was going to be fine. Finally, as the sun was setting and painting the cabin in shades of gold and red, their son was born. He came into the world screaming lustily, a healthy weight, with a shock of dark hair and his father's gray eyes. Doc Morrison cleaned him up and handed him to Katherine, who took her baby with trembling hands and tears streaming down her face. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We have been waiting for you." Sam knelt beside the bed, one hand touching his son's tiny head, the other gripping Katherine's shoulder. "He is perfect," he said hoarsely. "You did it. He is perfect." They named him James after Sam's father, with the middle name of Thomas for Katherine's father. Little James Donovan was a good baby, healthy and strong, and watching Katherine with their son made Sam fall in love with her all over again. She was a natural mother, patient and attentive, but also practical. When James fussed, she did not panic but systematically worked through what might be wrong. When he was hungry, she fed him. When he needed comfort, she provided it. And she talked to him constantly, telling him about plants and the forest, singing old songs her mother had taught her. "He cannot understand you yet," Sam pointed out one afternoon, watching her show James different leaves she had gathered. "He will learn faster if I start teaching him now," Katherine replied serenely. "Besides, I like talking to him. He is an excellent listener." Sam laughed and pulled both of them into his arms. His family, his whole world contained in this small cabin in the Colorado mountains. The years that followed were full and rich. James grew into a curious, energetic toddler who wanted to know everything about everything. Katherine taught him plant names before he could walk properly, and Sam taught him to track rabbits through the snow before his 3rd birthday. When James was 2, Katherine became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and their daughter was born on a warm summer evening with far less drama than James's arrival. They named her Sarah, and she had her mother's dark blonde hair and a personality that made it clear from day one that she would not be overlooked. "She is going to be trouble," Sam said fondly, watching newborn Sarah glare at him like she had opinions about his existence. "She is going to be strong," Katherine corrected. "Like her mother, God help us all." 2 years after Sarah came another son, Michael, who was quieter than his siblings but no less determined. And 2 years after that, their youngest, a daughter they named Emma, who completed their family perfectly. Their cabin had grown with their family, Sam adding rooms as needed until it was a proper house. Katherine's herb business had expanded too. She now supplied not just Silver Creek but several surrounding mining camps, and her reputation as a healer had spread throughout the region. People came from miles away seeking her remedies. Sam had gradually shifted away from bounty hunting as the children came. He still did some tracking work, but mostly for local law enforcement and only on cases close to home. He had discovered that he was far more interested in teaching his children wilderness skills than chasing criminals across the territory. On a warm summer evening in 1889, 11 years after their marriage, Katherine and Sam sat on the porch of their house watching their children play in the meadow. James, now 9, was teaching 7-year-old Sarah how to identify deer tracks. 5-year-old Michael was carefully examining a wildflower, and 3-year-old Emma was picking dandelions with serious concentration. "Can you believe we made all of this?" Katherine asked, leaning against Sam's shoulder. "Sometimes I still cannot believe you agreed to marry me," Sam replied, wrapping his arm around her. "A stubborn forager and an antisocial mountain man. Who would have thought it would work? I would have." Katherine tilted her face up to his. "You know why? Because you saw me. Really saw me, not who you wanted me to be or who society thought I should be, but who I actually was. And you loved me anyway. Not anyway, because of who you are. You are still the most extraordinary person I have ever met." Sam kissed her softly. "You saved my life that day in the forest, but you did more than that. You saved me from a life of loneliness. You gave me a reason to come home. You did the same for me. I had convinced myself I was fine alone, that I did not need anyone, but you showed me that needing someone is not weakness. It is brave." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the mountains and their children play in the fading light. Katherine thought about that day 11 years ago when she had found a bleeding stranger in the woods and made the decision to help him. She had no idea then that she was saving the man who would become her husband, the father of her children, her partner in every sense of the word. "What are you thinking about?" Sam asked. "That day you told me I knew your heart better than you did. Do you remember?" "Of course." "You knew mine too. You saw that I was lonely even though I pretended I was not. You saw that I wanted connection but was afraid to reach for it. You made it safe for me to want more." Sam pulled her closer. "We were both hiding, I think, protecting ourselves from pain by not letting anyone close. But pain is part of living fully. You taught me that. Mama, Papa." Sarah's voice rang out across the meadow. "James says I cannot learn to track, but I can. Tell him I can." "Your daughter is demanding attention," Sam said with amusement. "Our daughter," Katherine corrected, standing up. "And she is right. She can learn anything she sets her mind to." They walked out to join their children, and Katherine felt a wave of contentment wash over her. This life, with its noise and chaos and constant demands, was nothing like the quiet, solitary existence she had once lived. But it was infinitely better. That night, after the children were finally asleep, Katherine and Sam lay in their bed talking quietly. This was their favorite time, when the house was peaceful and they could just be together. "You ever miss it?" Sam asked. "The life you had before, when it was just you and your plants and no one making demands on your time?" Katherine considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I miss the quiet, and sometimes I wish I could spend a whole day in the forest without worrying about getting home in time to make dinner. But would I trade this life for that one? Never, not for anything. Even when the children are driving you crazy, even then. Because this is real, Sam. This messy, complicated, wonderful life we have built. This is what I was missing without even knowing it." "I love you," Sam said, pulling her close. "I loved you that first week when you saved my life. I loved you the day we married. I love you more now than I thought was possible. You are still teaching me things about my own heart. And you are still teaching me that it is okay to need someone. That independence does not mean isolation." Katherine kissed him. "We balance each other. We do." Years continued to pass in their mountain home. James grew into a strong young man who combined his mother's knowledge of plants with his father's tracking skills, becoming a wilderness guide for wealthy tourists who wanted to experience the Colorado mountains safely. Sarah, as predicted, was indeed trouble in the best possible way. She was the first to climb every tree, the first to explore every cave, and eventually became a teacher in Silver Creek, educating a new generation of children. Michael, true to his quiet nature, became a scholar of natural sciences, collecting and cataloging plants with an obsessive attention to detail that made his mother proud. And Emma, the youngest, surprised everyone by becoming a doctor, the first female physician in the region, using the healing knowledge her mother had taught her combined with formal medical training. Katherine continued her foraging and healing work well into her 60s, though she moved slower and carried less on her trips into the forest. Sam's tracking days were behind him, but he remained strong and capable, still chopping wood and maintaining their property with the same quiet competence he had always shown. They became pillars of the Silver Creek community, the healer and the mountain man who had built an unlikely but undeniable love. Young couples would sometimes come to them for advice, and Katherine always told them the same thing: see each other. Really see each other, not who you want them to be but who they actually are, and then love that person with everything you have. On a cool autumn evening in 1905, Katherine and Sam celebrated their 27th wedding anniversary. Their children had all come home for the occasion, bringing grandchildren who filled the house with laughter and chaos. James had married a sweet woman named Alice and had 3 children. Sarah had married a fellow teacher and had 2. Michael had married late but was devoted to his wife and their twin daughters. And Emma, always unconventional, had chosen to remain unmarried, focused on her medical practice. After dinner, after the grandchildren were in bed and their own children were sitting around the fire talking and laughing, Katherine and Sam slipped outside to watch the stars. 27 years, Katherine said wonderingly. Where did the time go? Into 4 children and 8 grandchildren and more joy than I ever imagined possible, Sam replied. His hair was gray now and his face was lined, but his gray eyes were still as clear and sharp as ever. Do you have any regrets? Only one. Sam looked at her in surprise. What? That bear that stole my strawberries. I never did get to make those preserves for Mrs. Henderson. Katherine's eyes twinkled with mischief. Other than that, nothing. Not a single thing. Sam laughed, the deep, rich sound she had fallen in love with so many years ago. You are still the most extraordinary woman I have ever met. You knew every plant in the forest, but you knew something far more important. What was that? You knew that we belonged together before I did. You looked at a bleeding stranger in the woods and saw your future. That took vision. I saw a man who needed help. Everything else was just paying attention. You are still doing that, you know, seeing things others miss, knowing people's hearts better than they know themselves. Katherine leaned against her husband, fitting perfectly into his side the way she had for nearly 3 decades. I think you have known my heart pretty well, too. You knew I needed someone who would not try to change me, someone who would stand beside me through everything. You have been that person every single day. It has been easy. Loving you has always been easy. They stood together under the stars, listening to the sounds of their family inside the house, the legacy of their love filling every corner of their world. Katherine thought about that young woman she had been, so certain she would spend her life alone, so convinced that independence meant solitude. She had been wrong, and she had never been happier about being wrong. The mountain man who had wandered into her life bleeding and in need of help had given her everything she did not know she wanted. A partnership built on mutual respect and understanding. A family that carried forward the best of both of them. A love that had only deepened with time and challenge. "What are you thinking about?" Sam asked, the same question he had asked her countless times over the years. "That I am grateful. For the bear that stole my strawberries, for the cougar that attacked you, for every twist of fate that brought us together. For you most of all. For seeing me and loving me and building this life with me." "The gratitude goes both ways," Sam said softly. "You saved my life in more ways than one. You gave me a reason to live, not just survive. You made me believe in happiness again." Inside, someone started playing the piano, and their children's voices rose in song. Emma had the best voice, clear and strong, and she was leading the others in an old hymn that Katherine's mother used to sing. "We should go back inside," Katherine said, though she made no move to do so. "In a minute. Let me hold you out here under the stars a little longer." So they stayed, the forager and the mountain man, the woman who knew every plant in the forest and the man who had learned his own heart through her eyes. They had started as strangers brought together by chance and necessity, and they had built something rare and precious. A love that had weathered storms and celebrated joys, that had created life and meaning and purpose. The stars wheeled overhead, eternal and unchanging, witnessing their love as they had witnessed it for 27 years. And when Katherine and Sam finally went back inside to rejoin their family, they walked hand in hand, two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed, even when they had not known they needed it. Their story was not one of grand gestures or dramatic rescues, though it had started with blood and pain and desperation. It was a story of two independent souls learning that true strength comes not from standing alone, but from choosing to stand together. It was a story of seeing and being seen, of knowing and being known, of loving and being loved without reservation or condition. And it was a story that would continue long after they were gone, carried forward by their children and grandchildren. The legacy of a woman who knew every plant in the forest and a mountain man who had learned that she knew his heart better than he ever could himself. And that gift of understanding had been the foundation of everything good in his life. The end.